Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. I'm 28 years old, and this happened 2 years ago. There were only a few days left until Christmas, but I had decided to take the whole week off from going into work in person. At my job, we could basically choose when we showed up at the office, and I had accumulated enough remote days that I could work from home that entire week. I already knew that around those days a big winter storm was supposed to hit the city, and with the holidays and everything else, all I wanted was to stay home and have a few quieter work days. The company handled remote work in a pretty simple way. The only thing that was really mandatory was turning in tasks by the deadline. Other than that, it was up to each person how they preferred to organize themselves. There were some extra rules and things like that, but in practice it meant I could work whatever schedule I wanted. I always liked sleeping in late and working late into the night. That day I started working around noon. The first few hours were slow and calm, for lack of a better way to put it. I was sipping my coffee and trying to make progress on my work. As those hours passed, the wind started getting stronger and stronger, banging against the window next to me, and the snow started falling little by little. By 3 or 4, it was already dark outside, not just because it was late, but because of the clouds overhead and all the snow piling up across the neighborhood. I had planned to go out and grab something for dinner, but with the streets the way they were, I decided to stay inside for the rest of the night. I kept working at my desk for a couple more hours. The sun had already gone down, and the winter storm had arrived at full force. I left the blinds open so I could watch the snow fall from my desk. But suddenly, without warning, a light flickered outside. I looked toward the window and saw a thin beam of light moving back and forth. There was no doubt about it. It was a flashlight. I leaned back a little, away from the desk, and just stared out the window for maybe 10 seconds, watching that light move around outside, until my curiosity got the best of me and I stood up to get closer and see what was going on. I mean, it had to be freezing out there. Why would someone be outside? I looked out, trying to see along the side of my house. I managed to spot the light, but before I could follow it to the person holding it, it shut off. Or maybe it got blocked behind something. I didn't know. It was too dark, and the snow pretty much blocked my entire view. When I didn't see anything else, I sat back down. Honestly, I think in that moment I assumed it was probably a neighbor who had lost a pet in the middle of the storm or was just looking for something. I didn't worry too much and tried to focus on work again while the storm kept pounding outside. Over the next 2 hours or so, the house wouldn't stop creaking and shifting with the wind. But a few times I thought I heard something a little louder and more distinct, enough for me to pause and look away from my desk, waiting to hear it again and figure out what it was. It didn't happen again. And in the end, how could it not just be the house making noises? Thinking it was something else felt way too unlikely, until I heard a much louder bang. It didn't sound like a simple impact against the wall or the house settling because of the wind. It sounded more like something breaking. And the worst part, it sounded like it had happened inside the house. I got up from my desk and walked out into the hallway. I didn't hear anything at that moment, and then I went downstairs. Everything looked and felt normal. It's not like I could hear much with those brutal winds, but there weren't any more loud bangs. The truth is, I wasn't scared enough to do a full search of every corner of the house, not without more noises or clear signs. So I started heading back up toward my office. I was almost to the top of the stairs when all of a sudden I heard a click and the entire house went dark. The power went out. I froze for a second. The whole house was completely black. With the storm outside, not even any light was coming through the windows. I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. I figured the storm must have affected the electricity, or maybe the breaker had tripped. I started going back down the stairs slowly, feeling for each step, moving carefully and blindly until I reached the downstairs hallway. The basement door where the breaker box was at the end of that hallway, so I started moving along the wall, sliding my hand over it to make sure I was going in the right direction. But when I started to hear something, I stopped. It was something moving, muffled, and it was coming from behind the basement door. It sounded like it was getting closer, until suddenly I heard the soft creak of the basement door opening. I felt my eyes widen as I stared into that pitch-black hallway. I took a step back and, without making any noise, slipped into the open bathroom door right beside me. I still couldn't see anything, and I felt like closing the door would give me away, so I left it open. Then I heard slow, quiet footsteps moving down the hallway. I held my breath, trying not to make a single sound. The footsteps got closer and closer until I felt like they were right outside the bathroom where I was. And then they passed by, right in front of the open doorway. I never actually saw the person walking just 2 or 3 feet from me. That's how unbelievably dark it was. The footsteps kept moving slowly down the hallway until they reached the stairs, and from there it was carpet, so I couldn't hear anything at all. Suddenly, the sound of the snowstorm outside took over everything I could hear again, almost like it got louder because of the emptiness inside the house. That person could have stopped walking and stood still at the bottom of the stairs, but I bet the most likely thing was that they had gone up, and in that moment I decided to run. I rushed out of the bathroom and blindly ran to the other side of the house with my hands out in front of me so I wouldn't slam into a wall. I got to the garage door, grabbed my keys, and went out through the side door to get into my car in the driveway. I drove off and used the vehicle's SOS device to contact the police. It wasn't a surprise. By the time they arrived, that person was gone. From what the officers were able to determine, after forcing their way in and cutting the power, whoever it was basically went straight up to my office, then to my bedroom, and nowhere else. That meant the person was definitely there looking for me. What really unsettled me is that most likely that person knew me, and they knew the layout of my house well enough to walk straight through it in a direct line, completely in the dark, and go straight to my office, right where they knew I'd be. It could have even been someone I talked to regularly, someone I never would have imagined had such horrible intentions. That made me question everything. I moved, but I was left with a constant paranoia toward basically any coworker or friend I wasn't truly close with. Since I moved, nothing like that has happened again. Hopefully, I never have any updates to give, but if something else does happen, I'll let you know. Story 2. I had been driving since very early in the morning, trying to make it from Minneapolis to my sister's house in Montana before the weekend. It was supposed to be a quick winter trip. Just me, my old but reliable Subaru, and a terrible gas station coffee. Everything was fine until it started snowing once I got a little farther north, in the more isolated parts of the highway. At first it wasn't too bad, just a light snowfall here and there, but it intensified pretty fast around the time the sun went down. It became almost a white wall that even my headlights struggled to cut through. After an hour like that, the road was completely covered in snow, to the point where it was hard to tell if I was even still on the highway. Once it got that stressful, I told myself I'd pull off at the next place I could find and wait out the blizzard. The moment I made that decision, maybe 15 minutes later, I barely managed to spot a light off the side of the road. It was snowing so hard that I couldn't even read what it was before I turned in. The parking lot was small, but it had 3 cars. One was clearly buried in snow, and the other 2 looked like they'd arrived not long before I did. I parked, and from there, based on the shape and look of the building, I could tell it was some kind of roadside diner. I'd been hoping for a motel, but I figured if I was going to be stuck there anyway, I might as well go in and get more coffee. I got out and hurried through the blizzard, already almost freezing. It definitely wasn't the kind of place I was used to, or one I'd ever been in before as a city person, so I felt completely out of place. It was a very small, old-fashioned diner with a counter near the entrance. There were 2 men sitting there with coffee and a woman working behind the counter. But when I opened the door, the inside was extremely quiet. None of them were talking or anything. Still, all 3 turned to look at me and greeted me immediately. It felt like I had walked right into the middle of an awkward silence or something. I figured maybe I was overthinking it. I sat near the men. It turned out the two of them had the same idea I did: stop and escape the storm. I ordered a coffee from the woman working there and carried the cup over to a seat by the front window, watching the snow keep falling outside and burying our cars. One of the men at the counter also gave me a strange feeling. He was older, maybe around 50, and the best way I can describe it is that he looked half dead. I don't know if it was the weather or boredom, or if he was just having a bad day. What was weird was that after I moved over and sat by the window, the conversation stopped again, and the place went quiet, just like it had been when I first walked in. We all sat there silently for a few minutes until suddenly one of the men stood up and said something about trying to make it to his nearby cabin before the roads got closed. No one else said anything. I watched through the window as he walked out to his car and climbed inside. He sat there for a minute, probably waiting for it to warm up. Then the other man also got up and, without saying a word, walked out of the diner. I moved from the window back to the counter and immediately asked the woman what was going on with those guys. She shrugged and said they'd arrived almost at the same time and that it looked like they'd been arguing in the parking lot before they came inside. After that, they barely spoke. She assumed it was road rage or something like that. I stayed at the counter for a while, talking with her about the storm and small talk. During those 30 minutes, no one else came into the diner. Eventually, I went back to the window to check the snow and see if it had let up at all. And that's when I saw that both of the men's cars were still there, but neither one of them was inside the cars or outside anywhere near them. They had simply vanished. That ran through me like a cold shock because it had been a while since they'd left the building. There was no way they could have been outside in the middle of a blizzard for that long. I walked up to the front door to get a better look, and then decided to step outside for a moment and look around. The cutting cold hit my face instantly, and the snow, though not as heavy as before, still made it hard to see clearly. Outside, aside from the aggressive wind, everything was silent. There were no signs of either man. That gave me such an uneasy feeling that I wanted to leave. I dragged my feet through the snow back to my car. My plan was to start it and let it warm up while I went back inside to wait a little longer before pulling out. But the car wouldn't start. And it wasn't like it was struggling to turn over. It didn't start at all. It didn't make the slightest sound when I turned the key. Only about 40 minutes had passed since I'd arrived at the diner, and my car hadn't had a single issue before that night. My instincts told me one of those men had something to do with it. I know that might sound crazy, like I was being overly suspicious from the beginning, but I knew it. And then, while I was sitting there still trying to get it to start, I saw someone, one of the men coming out of the woods behind the diner. He was only a dark figure covered by the night and the snowstorm, but he was coming back toward the cars. I got out immediately and ran back inside, locking the front door. The woman asked why I did that and what was going on, and I explained quickly and told her to call 911. She looked doubtful, but she did it anyway. A minute later, the man showed up at the door. He tried to get in, shoving the door. When he realized it was locked, he made eye contact with me through the glass and started pounding on the door. His eyes were bloodshot and his face was pale, but he still had that half-dead look. With that eye contact and the locked door, I think he understood that I had figured him out, or figured out whatever the hell was going on. He didn't stay there more than 10 seconds before sprinting back to his car. When the police arrived, there were only 3 cars in the parking lot, mine, the woman's, and the other man's. The creepy guy had gotten away. Unfortunately, that night didn't end like the typical, he left before anything happened. The officers followed faint tracks in the snow into the woods behind the diner and found the other man's body. None of his belongings were missing. It looked like it had simply been an act of violence. And just as disturbing, his car wouldn't start either. They discovered he had the exact same issue my car did. The ignition line had been deliberately cut. So with all that information, the story basically told itself. When both men arrived that night, at some point, the strange guy cut the line so the other man couldn't leave. Then he simply waited for him to come back outside and followed him. And of course, with the car not starting and no way to escape, either he was dragged into the woods or he tried to run. Either way, it ended the same, and with the storm winds howling, neither the woman nor I inside, had any idea any of that was happening just 20 feet from the front door. But at some point during those 30 minutes before I noticed something was wrong, that man had also cut my car's line, which probably means he had the same plans for me that night. I made it safely to my sister's house, but aside from a few check-in calls to make sure I was okay, I never heard anything else about whether they ever found the man. I don't think I'll ever take winter road trips again, and thinking about the image of that man stepping out of the woods through the blizzard, walking toward me, now knowing what he was really planning, still makes my heart race. Story 3. This happened around Christmas time last year. I think it was sometime between Christmas and New Year's. I was back in my hometown for winter break from college, but I still had bills and things to pay. So when I wasn't busy with family, I did DoorDash. It was snowing that night, but not enough to pack the roads to the point it was dangerous to drive. Still, it was enough for most people to not want to leave their houses to get food. So nights like that were perfect for making decent money. Orders were going fine up until 10 o'clock. Things slowed down, but I was still getting consistent orders. This order was like any other, except maybe it was a little farther than usual, about 20 minutes away. My hometown was small but spread out, so there were a lot of houses and places on the outskirts tucked into the woods. However, when I pulled up to where I was supposed to deliver the order, I felt a little unsure about it. The directions had taken me off the main road and onto a narrower forest road until I reached a spot where it looked like there should have been a gravel driveway leading deep into the trees. But it was completely covered by snow. No one had shoveled it, no one had cleared it, and I didn't even see any lights. No porch light, no outdoor lights. Nothing that indicated there was a house back there in the woods. I stayed in my car and called the customer, thinking maybe something was wrong with the address. He answered right away. The man sounded like he was in his mid-30s, and you could tell he smoked a lot from that deep, rough voice. I told him I was at the spot on the map where he had pinned the delivery, but I didn't see an open driveway, a house, or anything. The guy told me the driveway was probably covered by snow. The way he said it was like that was the most obvious thing in the world. I told him I thought I could see where the driveway was supposed to be, but I wasn't comfortable driving my car in there. Then he gave me a sarcastic response, saying that was the whole reason he had ordered delivery. And if I wasn't going to bring it, then what was the damn point? I didn't agree with that at all, and it felt like a real asshole thing to say. But in that moment, I guess I swallowed my pride and said, okay. I didn't want him canceling the order or leaving me a bad review, especially after driving all the way out there. Now looking back, I've reviewed the rules and everything, and now I know that if there's no access to the driveway or the drop-off location, that's the customer's responsibility. At the time, I wasn't sure, so when he hung up, I got out with the order, locked my car, and started walking into the snow. It wasn't super deep, but since it was a poorly maintained wooded driveway, I'm sure my car would have had trouble and probably would have gotten stuck. Plus, it was really hard to tell what the actual path even was. All I did was try to follow what I thought was a clearing between the trees, but with no lights around to guide me, I didn't actually know exactly where I was going. I kept looking back at my car, watching it get farther and farther away. It was like my only distance reference because ahead of me everything was too dark and I couldn't even tell where I was headed. Everything looked the same, just the same woods. And then suddenly I heard a sound to my left, a crunch that sounded disturbingly like a boot stepping on snow, but it was far away, barely within the range of what I could hear. I looked that way and even tried turning on my phone's flashlight, but it did absolutely nothing. I didn't see anything, and I didn't hear anything else, so I kept walking. The cold started seeping into my body, and the endless darkness in front of me made me rethink everything. I thought that by that point I would have seen the house, or something, at least some kind of sign that confirmed I was on the right path. I stopped there for a few seconds, standing still, like I was realizing something, that all of this was too weird. I looked around, and I know it sounds stupid, but it wasn't until that moment that I thought maybe there wasn't actually any house back there, like the whole thing was some kind of weird trick to lure me out there, which was absolutely terrifying to think about. Me, alone in a dark, snowy forest. I pulled out my phone and decided that if the customer didn't answer, or if he tried again to convince me to keep walking, I was leaving and canceling the order. I dialed and put the phone to my ear while I listened to it ring. It rang twice, and then I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head and saw a light far away between the trees. Then that light snapped off, and half a second later, the call dropped. I didn't even wait or try to think it through. In that moment, I turned around and started running back the way I came. The sound of snow crunching under my feet drowned out anything else that might have been coming from behind me, like whether the guy was chasing me or not. That probably made it even more terrifying, not knowing what was behind me. I ran until I got back to my car, and before I even reached the door, I could tell something was wrong. The car was tilted to one side, and that's when I saw one of the tires was completely flat. Someone had slashed it. Even so, I got in, started it, and drove out of there. I called the police while I was leaving, but aside from asking me a few questions, they were pretty useless and didn't really seem to take the situation very seriously. To me, it's pretty clear that man was trying to lure me deeper into the woods for some reason, and that he even went as far as slashing my tire to keep me there, or stop me from leaving. I don't know what I would have found if I had kept walking farther into those trees, or what would have happened to me.